Okay, guys, welcome. Hopefully you find that this is a useful way for you guys to get the content, the lecture. Given that you'll be able to listen to it when you want, you can stop and pause and do what you need to add notes. You can take as long as you like, or you can skip forward, up to you. But welcome to Term 3 content. We're looking now into the Unit 2, which is Semester 2. And there's some really interesting content that we're going to be covering, so hopefully this is going to be a really useful one. And this content that we're doing directly in this slide or these slides for this week and next week relates to your first task or Semester 2, which is community development. So let's get started. Maybe we won't get started. How do I... Oh, here we go. Okay, community development. So for the first part that we're going to be looking at, the first little video that I've made is going to be on the definition, the purpose and the principles behind community development. Trying to look and investigate what the purpose of it is, why are we trying to improve a community in the first place, and which specific areas are we targeting. And within that, we're going to look at some of the more interesting content. So there's the 6 principles of community development. We'll look at those in more detail. There is a second part, which we'll do in the next video, which hopefully will complement this one. So you'll notice that for your PowerPoints this semester, I have included a syllabus link. I've just copied and pasted the dot points that we're going to be covering from the syllabus into here, just so it kind of gives you a reminder so you can see it. So obviously the first one, definition and purpose of community development. That's probably going to be something useful to know for potential exams or assessments. Okay. Below that, you can see that there's the 6 principles. Okay, sustainability, diversity, social justice, human rights, addressing disadvantage, valuing local culture, knowledge, skills, and resources. Okay. Some of the other parts that we're going to look at, and this is probably more in the second video, it's going to be the relationship between participation and empowerment in community development. A really interesting concept. So the more participation you have, the more empowerment you have, the more empowered you are, the more participation. A bit like chicken and egg, but we'll explore that one a bit further. And then we look at the levels of participation within community development. So I guess this is useful for those that end up going into government jobs or health promotion planning, town planners, or just working in areas that are really trying to address disadvantaged or impoverished areas to improve the community, give everyone the equal opportunity that they deserve. And this is how many organisations, governments structure their development of those communities to try and enhance it. Obviously, if you're in a community, you want to be in a very successful community, thriving, and that's going to give you the best option. Okay, so what do you know? What do you believe makes up a community? Most of us will have a range of communities that we're involved in. You're all, congratulations, well done. You're all part of the Kennedy community, very prestigious and honourable community. So that's probably not your choice, but you've ended up here, well done. So that's part of a community. You might play sport, whether you play in a local soccer club, footy club, netball, whatever it is. That's got its own little community. Within the area that you live, you might have a sense of community, suburbs, maybe a group of suburbs together. Even within Perth, its own community. All right, you've got the down south community, eastern states, Western Australia, its own community. Okay, and on a larger scale, Australia being a community. Okay, so that's what we know makes up a community. There's lots of other elements, but these are the main ones that we're looking at. So we've already covered that. Are you part of a community? Hopefully you're like, yes, I am. And then if you are part of a community, hopefully you can look and go, is there areas that are disadvantaged or people that are struggling or that don't have the equity that we want to improve? Because if everyone's thriving and flourishing, you're going to have a more successful community. So what do you associate with the word development? All right, is it speed and growth? Is it change? Is there something else that you can think of? Is there something else that when you think development, is it enhancing? Is it just a thing that happens over time? Is it immediate? Lots of different things will come to mind, and everyone has a different perspective, which is really useful to have. Okay, what do you believe community development is? All right, spend a couple of minutes just having a think. Right, community development, break it down. What do the two words mean? What do you expect it to do? And then when you're moving forward and learning this new content, does it line up or is it slightly different? Okay. So, in terms of the health approach that we're looking at, community development is structured intervention. And the idea is that the intervention will, number one, give the community greater control over the conditions that affect their lives. It's going to address the issues of powerless and disadvantage and empower people to be part of social change. Now, for what we're looking at, it's probably the second one, addressing issues of powerless and disadvantage. That's most likely to be the key one here. We want to target those that are disadvantaged, impoverished, those ones that might not have places to live, might be struggling really low down on the socioeconomic status. Okay, those ones that possibly because of factors outside their control may not flourish and may not have those opportunities. As a community, we want to ensure that everyone has equal opportunity to take advantage of those opportunities. Okay. The third one is also quite important though. We want to empower people to be part of social change. And we're starting to see this within societies these days. So there's been a huge shift towards empowering of people towards caring for the environment, okay, for social justice issues. And there's a range of these which we'll explore throughout this video. The definition that we're looking at is from a guy called Allen, 97, but this one is one of the ones that it has been referenced again, I'm pretty sure, since 2005. So it's a common one that they reference because it was such a good one to start with. All right, it's the process of involving communities from the ground up in their own decision making about factors relating to health. All right, I'll go through it again and break it down. So the process involving communities from the ground up in their own decision making about factors related to health. All right, the key parts of that being it's coming from the ground up, so it has to be the empowerment of the community rather than a mayor or a premier or a prime minister saying this is what you need to do. It has to be about the individuals getting in, having that empowerment so they can make their own educated decisions, and hopefully the positive ones that will affect their own factors of health. Okay, so the development of a community is far more than the infrastructure. It's far more than putting in new roads, putting in a new shopping centre, a new Hoyts, a new time zone, because everyone loves time zone. It's far more than just the structural aspects. Although they are important, we're talking about the relationships between individuals with the communities, between businesses and other organisations within the sporting areas, clubs with different clubs. We're looking at as a whole range of aspects. We're talking different cultures and races and ages, everything all together. That's what makes up a community. All right, so it is more than just the physical. Oh, my community at Kennedy is a bunch of limestone buildings with an auditorium and a pretty cool sports centre, okay, and a giant oval. There is more to it than that. Community development must be able to identify the values, the needs, and the aspirations of not only the residents, the community members, the businesses, and other appropriate stakeholders for the benefit of all involved, okay? This is, again, this one has to identify the values, needs, and aspirations of not only the residents, but all community members. Businesses, if you don't account for them, businesses won't succeed. And then the residents aren't going to be happy because they don't have a local time zone to go play games at. All right, other stakeholders, that might be people that invest into those areas. It might be people that are involved in government organisations that bring in different types of intervention programs or trial new recreational programs, all these types of things which we need to consider. So who is community development for? As I said before, the main people that we're looking at is the disempowered. Okay, the disempowered and disadvantaged people. Disengaged communities with ongoing inequalities specific to health experiences. Okay, so based on their socioeconomic class, the gender, the race, the ethnicity, and there's a few other factors which we can also look at as well. Right, but we're looking for those ones that are struggling, that are because of certain belief, because of a certain background, age, gender, these sort of things, that they don't have the equality and opportunities to flourish and thrive as human beings. And this is where we're going to look into it a little bit more. Because of these populations are so disengaged at times, they are the hardest ones to reach. Okay, they're the ones that are going to be struggling the most with the poorest health. So if we think back to our determinants of health, we know that higher socioeconomic status, except for maybe perhaps the extremes, the higher socioeconomic status, the more likely you are to be healthy. All right, you have more education, you have more access to the resources, you have more income available, so you can spend it on things being healthy. You don't have to stress as much, not all the time, but generally. So those that are in the lowest sort of area, the ones that are in disengaged, struggling, maybe facing discrimination or racism, they're the ones that are likely to be a lower socioeconomic class. Therefore, they're the ones that are going to have a lower overall health status. And they're the ones that we want to improve. We want a community. You're only as good as your weakest link. So if you've got a group of people in your community who are struggling with their health, then for the whole community to prosper and to flourish, they have to be lifted up. They have to reach a certain level for the whole community to manage and to improve. Okay, so according to Egger, Spark and Donovan, 2005, community development should incorporate the following elements. Okay, these are really important. The knowledge of the health and health-related problems of the focus community. If you go into a community and you're trying to target different health problems to what they don't really see as an issue, you're not going to have a lot of luck. If you think back to the Chinese cancer villages video that we watched in term 1, if someone went in there and instead of actually dealing with the waste and the pollution that's around there, they just started planting new trees to make it aesthetically pleasing for everyone in the streets, they're avoiding the serious health issue and health-related problems that community needs. All right, so it's about understanding what does that community need and why do we need to address it. All right, not going in and be like, usually it's just because we need it to look better. That's missing the point. Knowledge is key here. A comprehensive knowledge of the focus community, which is the population, class, age, structure, the available resource, knowledge of the normal processes. So we're looking at all these different factors in what we're trying to look at. Are we trying to account for an aging population? Are we trying to account for the limited resources that maybe a rural community, remote community might have? If you go in there and you go, let's just build new hospitals for a town that's got a population of 2,000, then you're going to be missing the point and it's going to waste money, it's going to waste resources. Yeah. There's also the identification of the community leaders, and that's really important because if you go in there and forego community leaders, especially if there is cultural significance of those community leaders, in this case Indigenous leaders, elders, and you disregard or you don't consult them, then that's a good way to get offside. Imagine if we at staff at Kennedy just didn't listen to the student councillors and then when made decisions about students that are going to be the ones that students normally make for themselves, then you're going to see that there's going to be a bit of backlash from that, or people aren't going to be very happy with what's happening. The final one is the opinions surveys. Okay, so usually what you'll find is before something happens, or they'll go and do opinion polls, or they'll go do some sort of survey which will get people understanding what the issues are and what people are looking to try and do. And these are really important because if you can't understand what the community is wanting and you go in there, they want a new sports stadium and you go in there and build a new library, they had done the survey, they'd probably understand that they actually wanted the library not to be there, and instead they wanted a new sports stadium. Okay, so this moves us on to the principles of community development. Now, there are 6 of these, and we're going to look into each one of these ones in a little bit more detail. I would expect for each one of these that you would have a good understanding of what it means. Okay, possibly I'm going to give you a couple of different options of what you can go. The textbook will give you some different perspectives as well. So for example, sustainability, we can look at not only the environmental factor, but we can look at the long-term planning from a government on how they're going to stay as a community that's going to be flourishing for not only the immediate future, but also 20, 30 years time. So what I would expect is a really comprehensive understanding of each of these principles, but also having a really good example that you can use for each of one of these ones. Right? If you need to, pause this video, write them down, take your time. There's no prizes or Freddos for finishing this first. Okay, so as I said, sustainability, diversity, human rights, social justice, addressing disadvantage, valuing local knowledge. Okay, by addressing these 6 areas, community developers aim to improve the skills of communities to address issues that they may be facing. Okay, there is no perfect community. Each community will have something that they are facing. Some will be more serious than others. Some will have more diverse issues. But these principles help us to address all of these ones. Okay, sustainability. So immediately the first thing that comes to my mind is environment. Okay, the sustainability of the environment, and where it's starting to shift through all the information of climate change. Unless you're a Trump supporter and you don't believe in it, then most of us are aware that there is definite shifts in climate change, and there's a push for renewable energy. You see more people driving Teslas, and electric cars, hybrid cars are becoming more normal. Long gone are the days of people driving around expensive fuel guzzling cars. We're starting to shift towards being environmentally friendly, and this applies to the communities as well. All right, we don't want to be building new buildings and new residential areas that are going to be consuming large amount of resources that use a lot of our natural resources, water. The farming has to be sustainable. Forests and the way that we farm forests for everything made out of wood and paper and all these types of things, we have to be looking at how these things are going to be affecting a community. So a bit more on sustainability. So in order for a community to be stable, and looking at the financial and planning types of situations of a community, you have to be able to meet the needs in the present whilst having a long-term plan for the future. So I mentioned before about the government, and you can think back to the recent election that we had and how that worked. There's a lot of information about, yes, in the next few years, we're going to build this, we're going to build new hospitals, we're going to do all these little amazing things. But there was no real long-term plan that they were pushing forward. So these are sort of the things that we want to be considering in terms of community development. And you might think about your community, if it's a sporting club, what things have been put in place to make sure that your club is successful, not only for the next 3-4 years, but 20 years from now. What things have been put in place? To be able to achieve this, it is important to increase the community participation in projects. Okay, I mentioned it earlier. Participation leads to empowerment. Okay, if you can have more participation in community projects, it brings people together. It means that it's more likely to be successful than for have longevity. If you've got a sporting club, or you've got a any type of club or community that you've developed, and you've only got 50 members, and each year you're losing a couple of members, it's not sustainable, right? As a sporting club, you'd probably want to be developing this community within your club that's attracting new members, that's growing your sport, growing your game, growing the community in a positive direction. We see that with communities and suburbs as they've been planned. They want to develop a sense of community, so they have lots of fairs. In Vic Park, they have the street fair where they close down the main street and it's have vendors and performances, and it's a real sort of social gathering. There's some other ones where they have multicultural ones where they get all different cultures together and they have this huge event, which improves a sense of empowerment because there's so much participation. Essentially, the community must have the resources for today, whilst at the same time having plans in place to keep these resources for the future. So you can look at this in terms of what resources do we have that we are when necessary. So you could look at water here. What water availability do we have? We know that South Africa last year was pretty much at the point where they're going to have to turn off their taps because their water reserves were so low. We are on the same level as South Africa, being in Perth. Okay, same position on the earth, slightly around the corner, but we are likely to experience something similar because of the geographical location. Is there something that we're doing to plan for the future if that was to happen? What are we doing with our resources now? Do we have endless supply of mining up the north of WA, which we're happy to export? Will that run out? What do we do if it runs out? Do we have alternatives? Can we then market something else? Maybe we can generate, thousands of solar farms because we've got a lot of sunlight. But these are the things that we need to be thinking about. So, diversity. With diversity, this is a really interesting one. I've included a link to a TED Talk. I would watch this TED Talk. It's not only beneficial for this content, but it's also really good to give you a perspective on diversity. Now, the TED Talk actually talks a little bit different on a different subject. It's not talking about community development, but it gives you a good understanding how and why the importance of diversity within business, within your social life, within your professional life, within your friendship group is going to be really invaluable part of your growth and development and being open towards new things, which is always going to be good. If anyone's been traveling, you'll notice that going to a different country, especially a country that might be very completely different to Australia, it's going to be very diverse. Okay, they're going to have very different things, but if you're open to it and you're open to new foods and you're open to new ideas, you can come back with a really different perspective on your own life, which is going to only help you and increase your intelligence. So what I would do, I recommend go have a watch of that video, and then once you've done that, you can come back into this video. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you found that TED Talk invigorating and thrilling, and at least it's got you thinking differently. So what we need to cover for the topic of diversity in community development is understand what it is, and it's the quality of being different. Okay, I'm sure you're all very aware of what diversity may mean within a community, so you can try and apply it. But a few other examples to help. You can be thinking of things like age and gender, culture, ethnicity, education. It could be experience, it could be, people who've gone through different things in their life, different experiences, different life events. These are all really interesting perspectives. And the more differences that we have, the better we're likely to be. Imagine if all your friends were exactly the same as you, or if you're exactly the same as one of your best friend. Okay, every time you agree on something, there'd never be someone who would just disagree and challenge you on something. No, actually, hang on. What if we did it from this point of view, or what have you thought about this? Okay, I had a really good way of understanding this when I was at uni, and someone explains, like, you're driving along, someone cuts you off, goes through a red light. The first reaction for most people is to maybe have some expletives that you generally throw towards their area, and maybe a couple of hand gestures. That's probably our standard reaction in Perth anyway. But he mentioned, he goes, well, what happens if that person is racing to get to the hospital because their 1-year-old is being rushed to hospital with a life-threatening condition? Or there's something that has led that person to need to do that and take those risks to get through that traffic light and to cut you off. And it was a really good way to think of it, a different perspective. Okay, so this is again where the diversity, he was coming from a different perspective on it, and it really challenged the way that I could think about something. So perhaps you can apply that example to this sort of scenario, diversity. The final dot point is, although community development may implement change, it's important that diversity is respected. All changes need to be equitable to all. So if you're going to make a change within a community, that's great, as long as it's not going to be at the disadvantage of a certain group or a minority perhaps, or even the larger population. We want to be improving and creating equity for all. Okay, that's the goal of here. We don't want to isolate further or isolate anyone. In the whole point of it is development, So we have to be very conscious of that. Okay, human rights. A really big topic. We're not going to cover everything in it because it is quite giant. So, human rights. Essentially what it is the human rights recognize the inherent value of each person regardless of your background, where you live, what you look like, what we think, what we believe, what we do, how long you've lived. It doesn't matter. All right, every single person has a human right. If you're a refugee who's been in a detention center for 20 years and then you want to seek asylum in Australia or a different country, that person has exactly the same rights as someone who's had a family history of 5 generations in Australia. Every single person on this earth has human rights. Unfortunately, we have so many people that deprive others of their human rights. Okay, that happens through slavery. It might happen through forced marriages. It might happen through a whole range of issues, and it even happens in Australia. So let's not kid ourselves there. And we're going to have a look at some of those ones just to get an idea. Okay, these human rights are based off principles of dignity, equality, mutual respect, which should and are shared across most cultures, religions, and philosophies. Okay, they're about being treated fairly, treating others fairly, and having the ability to make genuine choices in our daily lives. Now, this is the Australian version. So Australia has adopted the Declaration of Human Rights, and then they've modified it slightly to fit the Australian way. Okay, so you might find that these what I've just gone through now doesn't actually apply to some of these other countries. You might think, if you go to North Korea, you might find that their human rights is something of a contentious issue over there, because we know that there's reports of the deprivation of human rights. Okay, we know that if you're up to date with current affairs in Hong Kong over the last few weeks, there's been huge protests about extradition laws that they're trying to pass there. There's been millions of people flooding the streets in protest, and they've become quite violent with these protests to avoid China being able to extradite someone to China, mainland, where they have, and we know that there has been cases where people have been tortured or gone missing for doing various different, crimes or actions against authority. So Australia is going to be different to other countries, but however, this is the Australian one, and we're looking predominantly Australian community development. If you would like to look further, there is a link here. If you click on this link, obviously I haven't got this open the whole, I'm not recording the whole screen, and I don't know if it's going to work. Click on this link, okay, you can actually see on here part of the screen anyway. So for example, Article 3, everyone has the right to liberty, life, liberty, and security of person. If we go down, there's quite a few of these. Let's go to a nice short one. 13, I'll read it all. So everyone has the right to freedom and movement, and it says, and residence within the borders of each state. Everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own, and to return to his country, unless you break the law. Everyone has the right to nationality. No one should be arbitrarily deprived of his nationality, nor denied the right to change his nationality. So these are all just human rights that we expect people to have and that they should have. If you want to look further, have a look at that link, and you'll be able to see a few more of those ones there. Furthermore, there's a couple on page 126, which you guys can look into if you want some further understanding around human rights. Okay, failing that, Google it. There's a lot, but essentially in community development, we don't want to deprive people of their human rights. We want to allow people to reach their potential, to realize they have these rights, and to act on those rights. Social justice. Okay, this is the equal distribution of resources, opportunities, in which outside factors that categorize people are irrelevant. So straight away, that little sentence there is the equal distribution of resources and opportunity. Resources, it could be land, it could be finances, it could be health, it could be a whole range of different things. that fall into that category of resources. Opportunities, all right, that could be the opportunity for education, to be a healthy, thriving person in the community. It could be the opportunity for career aspirations. It could be the opportunity to pursue something that you love doing, whatever that is. Okay, and these things shouldn't be affected by any of the factors that categorize people. Okay, so we're talking about things like your age, your sex, whether you're male or female, whether you're neither of those genders, how you fit into the society. Just because you've come from another country and you've only been in Australia for 2 weeks doesn't mean that you shouldn't have the same opportunities as someone who's been here for 20 years. Okay, those unfortunately we still categorize people into race, and we have racism. Okay, we still categorize people into in Australia anyway. Some of the biggest issues we have is the Indigenous inequality. Right, they do not get the same opportunities in education, healthcare, and other factors that then influence how we or how they can fulfill their lives. So these are some of the things that we're going to look at. So in a nutshell, to address social justice, it's based on human rights and may hold some of the following beliefs. All historical inequalities all historical inequalities that affect current injustices should be corrected until they no longer exist. We've got a long way to go before we can rectify the stolen generation inequalities. That has got an intergenerational trauma attached to it, so we're still seeing the effects, and we will continue to see those effects of what happened all those years ago. So that one issue in particular is such a strong and pivotal issue within Australia that has really gone unresolved, and there's a lack of education around it, which until that actually it gets resolved, and until people are educated about it and how that has caused so much pain and suffering, and it has also changed and influenced the perspectives of what we believe about those people who have been victims of it, that's not going to resolve that issue, and that's going to be an ongoing social justice issue. A couple of other examples you might have seen. There's a lot of seems to be a lot of police shootings in the US, and there was a huge movement towards the Black Lives Matter, where African American, predominantly males, were being shot, and there's been a lot of videos recorded of this happening where they seem to be doing nothing wrong. They seem to be cooperating, and then they are aggressively, assaulted and sometimes shot, which is pretty horrible. So there's this one. Really, you can think about a lot of current affair issues. And the last one I put in was refugees leaving their country because of war, and then being locked up in a detention center until they're processed. And sometimes this is lasting, up to 10 years, sometimes longer. And there's to the point where those people are really struggling with their health. So I know that Manus Island, Christmas Island have been some of the detention centers that have been thrown around. These places really need to be looked at in terms of, is this social justice? These people are leaving the country because if they stay, they're going to get killed, or they're going to be tortured, or something horrible is going to happen to them. So they flee, and they end up in a poor prison, a very poor prison, where it's actually getting to the point where teenagers are self-harming, and there's thoughts of suicide and all sorts of mental health issues that are developing because of conditions. So it's really it's a pretty terrible thing that's happening. So these are some of the things that we need to rectify in order to develop social justice, and people spend their lives dedicated to trying to improve and trying to resolve some of these. The second point that we have is wealth, power, and status should be redistributed for the good of the individual, community, and society. So you often will see that or hear the term that 1% of the world's population own 99% of the world's wealth, which is probably, if not, I think it's even getting further. That gap is widening. So we have the rich are getting much richer and much more powerful, because wealth generates more wealth, and then the poor are getting much more poorer as they get richer. So it's looking at a redistribution. If you scale it back to a community, how can we redistribute the wealth, the power, and the status within a society for an individual? that's going to boost the individual, it's going to boost community, that's going to boost society. And that's a really tough one, because you're always going to have arguments. So that's one that maybe one of you will end up working in that area and seeing what you can do to really pursue that. The third one is the government has a responsibility of ensuring that all of its citizens have basic quality of life. Fortunately, Australia does a fairly good job. Unfortunately, we probably think we're doing better than we really do. Homelessness is on the rise, and there is an increase in that, particularly in Australia and youth. And that's a basic quality of life, is having somewhere to live, having meals, having an education, and at times we're failing in that. And if you think to a country in perhaps Africa or one of the less developed nations in the world, is the government making sure that people have a basic quality of life? Sometimes it's out of control due to famines or these factors that we can't control, but also there's factors that they can control, and things like corruption and the restriction and communism, where people are not given the basic quality of life for whatever reason because the government is acting in an inappropriate way. And that's something that would be really keen for people to look into and explore a little bit more. So social justice is a huge concept. We only look at these ones in here, but if you want to look into other examples, feel free to read the textbook to fully understand that as well.